What's up, guys? Saf here on SuperSaf Speaks, and welcome to episode number 48 of the podcast with myself, your host, SuperSaf, and my co-host,
Thunder E from Border Work.
And we've got a jam-packed episode today. We're going to be talking about the Samsung Galaxy S25 Edge, which we've both had for a couple of weeks, our review of that, the iPhone 17 Air, some fresh new leaks about, in particular, the battery. We've both covered the Honor 400 Pro, and it's got a very interesting new feature called AI Image to Video, which we're going to talk about. More Pixel 10 leaks, actual photos. It's just a matter of time before we start seeing full-on unboxings and everything. And WWDC 25 is next week, so we're going to do a rumor roundup on what to expect for that. Initially, we're going to start off with the Samsung Galaxy S25 Edge, which is technically the thinnest commercially available smartphone right now at just 5.8 millimeters. It's around 163 grams. You could argue that there are thinner phones because of the foldable category, which are thinner when they are unfolded, but when they're folded, they're thicker. So, I'll let you guys debate that in the comments.
Thinnest traditional smartphone.
Yeah, thinnest traditional smartphone, let's call it that. Okay, so having used it for a bit, like initially it's like, who's this phone for, right? That's the question that everybody's been asking. One thing that I will say is you can see as many videos as you want. You can see comparisons of it, next to things like the S25 Edge and other smartphones. But when you feel it in hand, there is just something special about it. It's just something special about it, isn't it?
Oh, yes. It's, I think the question you asked at the very beginning is, who's this phone for? And it felt that way when I was doing the unboxing. But once you take it out and you hold it, you're like,
yeah.
Okay. That's my emotional reaction while unboxing the phone.
Now, it is durable. It feels premium because of the titanium frame. They've also got the Corning Gorilla Glass Ceramic 2, which is the first device for that. So in my usage, it's been quite durable. In my opinion, if you're really going to use this device, if you're thinking of buying it, you want it without a case, right? I mean, if you're going to have such a thin device and you're going to stick a case on it, is it really worth it? Granted, it's going to be thinner compared to a regular smartphone, even with a case. But yeah, there's just something I think you kind of need to have this phone naked if you want to truly appreciate just how thin it is. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. I have found some really thin cases that do work well. But even with those cases, friends have kind of been like, hey, do you have the Edge? And I'm still taking it off because I really want them to experience it. And then they hold it and they go, oh. And they're like, should I get this over the Ultra? I'm like, okay, let's talk.
Okay. So now let's talk about that. So now, look, cameras, very familiar. This is the thing, after using this device, put the thinness aside, it's a very familiar device. It's a Samsung. You've got One UI, you've got Galaxy AI, so all of the Galaxy AI suite is there. Cameras as well. You've got the 200 megapixel camera, you've got the 12 megapixel ultra wide. Again, feels very familiar. Did I miss the telephoto camera, the periscope zoom camera? Now, coming from the S25 Ultra, yes, I did. However, if you're not coming from something like the S25 Ultra, which does have that extended zoom, are you really going to miss it? I'd say probably not.
I don't know. I really don't know. I think it's one of those things where my use case for the last 2 weeks, because I've been traveling and I went to Computex. So I'm in Taipei, I'm in a different country. You're going to use that, periscopic zoom immediately. You're going around places, you're seeing stuff. And I try to do it and I was like, oh, I got that feeling. But I do agree that I think sometimes it depends on your situation, especially if you're just at home. But because I was traveling, that skewed my opinion to that level. I personally feel like you could add a third camera to this though, because it's a camera hump. That's just my own perception.
You couldn't, not a periscope. You could get a telephoto, so maybe three times. But
yeah, exactly.
The thing is, though, with this, because it's 200 megapixels, you can get lossless to 2x easily, right? You're going to get absolutely fine. And it does extend, and you still get good results. Obviously, Samsung has their software processing for extended zoom as well. It's just not going to be to the level of obviously the S25 Ultra, which I think we're kind of a niche because we're used to that. We're used to that extended zoom. I don't think everybody else is. So if you're not used to something and then you kind of come to here, I don't think you're necessarily going to miss it. Like if, for instance, there are a lot of iPhone users, for instance, who you just buy the regular iPhone, right? They'll only get like the 16, not the 16 Pro or the Pro Max. And they haven't experienced extended zoom, for instance. I'm just giving you an example. And maybe somebody who's on an older Samsung device, maybe they're on the Flip, which doesn't have a zoom camera. Are you going to really miss it? No, you're not going to miss the zoom camera. So I think it depends on your personal use case, of course, as always. But I think in my usage, as I said, the day-to-day usage has been very familiar. You know you're using a Samsung, everything. You've got all of the features. There are actually not that many compromises when it comes to particular things. Like, for example, I wasn't expecting this to have wireless charging. It does have wireless charging, right? I thought to make it thinner, they're not going to include the wireless charging coils. You can even reverse wireless charge on this if you want it, okay? You probably don't want to do that. But anyway, we'll get to that. It's also got a Quad HD Plus resolution display, which I wasn't expecting, okay? I thought they're not going to do that. If I'm honest with you, you probably don't want to put it onto Quad HD Plus resolution. You probably want to stick to Full HD Plus resolution. And that is because of the battery life. Now, as expected, being a thinner device, physically, we were expecting a smaller battery, which we do have, a 3,900 milliamp hour battery, which is smaller than what we have even on the base S25. And, around 20% smaller compared to something like the S25 Ultra or the S25 Plus, okay? I guess the question everybody is kind of asking and wondering, how is the battery life on this, right? So for me personally, I would say, of course, it's nowhere as good as the S25 Ultra. The S25 Ultra gets me through the day absolutely fine, maybe a little bit more. You just have to remember that you're going to get around 20% less battery life compared to something like the S25 Ultra. Is that good enough for you? If the S25 Ultra would have lasted you a day and a half, then this is going to last you a day comfortably, right? If the S25 Ultra was only lasting you about a day because you're a heavy user, then this is not going to last you the full day. And that's the way I really see it. Now, you actually used this when you were out in Taipei traveling. What was your experience like?
This is quite interesting. So you know how with especially Galaxy devices lately, it takes roughly around a week for it to start getting to understand, the battery management, how you're using the device. So on the one hand, the first week I was in the US, and then the next week I changed locations and I'm traveling. My battery life, once I landed in Taipei, the first day was not great. And what I mean by not great is when I was in the US, my battery life, I would wake up around like 8 o'clock in the morning and my phone would last me till about 8 at night. Now, some people say that's not great, but I am a heavy user. So compared to most average users, I think it's fine for them. Taipei, by like 5, it was cutting off. So I had to switch on power saver mode. Initially, and that actually pushed it to almost around 10 for me while I was in Taipei, because also this was the only phone I used because I had Google Fi on here, so I had like full internet connection and everything while using the device. So I would say for me as a power user, this actually worked out as long as I had the power saving mode on throughout the whole day. And, I was able to watch content on TikTok, on, IG, go ahead and use my phone for emails, all that fun stuff. So I think it's good. It's just not for the S25 Ultra user, because that's a power user. That's somebody that literally is expecting to maximize the device as much as possible. For an everyday user, I think they've done a good job here. Whether it's a combination of the Snapdragon 8 Elite, the battery management in there as well. The fact that One UI is also more optimized, like all those things kind of come into play. So I think it's fine.
I think the 8 Elite is definitely a factor because that is a very efficient chipset. So, it does help you get the battery life. You just have to remember that it's not going to be as good as other devices out there. That's just something that you're going to have to, that's something that I guess when you're going in, if you're thinking of getting the S25 Edge. And also, some people are wondering, why is there no faster charging? It's only 25 watts. There's no 45 watts. It's a smaller battery, so it charges up quicker, right? To fill it up, the charge is quicker. So, if you are somebody who maybe puts your phone onto a wireless charger, when you're on your desk. Maybe you're somebody who plugs in your smartphone when you're in your car. If you're doing those kinds of things where you are giving it a little bit of a, like maybe a 10, 15 minute boost in the middle of the day, you're going to be absolutely fine. If you're somebody who's not a heavy user, using it day to day, you should be fine. If you are a heavy user and you're going to be on your phone a lot, then this smartphone is not for you. Apart from that, it is quite interesting what they've done. I think the few reasons that we've kind of discussed before, Samsung wanting to get in there before Apple, and also maybe they're just testing the market, seeing what is the demand for a device like this, then we can develop this technology further. Mm-hmm. And also the thin technology kind of translates nicely to the Fold, which we are hoping to see in the next couple of months as well. So that's the S25 Edge. And that brings us on nicely to the iPhone 17 Air, because we have some fresh new leaks. Now, this, as we know, is supposed to be replacing the iPhone 16 Plus. So we're no longer going to have a iPhone 17 Plus. It's just going to be an iPhone 17 Air that's going to be replacing that. The rumored weight, the latest leaks that we're getting from Majinboo, I believe is the way you say the name, is that it might be under 150 grams. So around 146 grams, which would make it quite a bit lighter compared to the S25 Edge, right? Which is 163 grams. And rumored to be around 5.5 millimeters thin, which would make it around 0.3 millimeters thinner compared to the S25 Edge. Now, one of the reasons for the lower weight is because it's rumored to have 7000 series aluminum, not titanium like the S25 Edge has. The key thing with the iPhone 17 Air, currently the rumors are that the battery size will be 2,900 milliamps. I'm going to just pause there for a second. 2,900 milliamps, which is significantly smaller compared to the S25 Edge, which is 3,900 milliamps. Now, granted, Apple always has slightly smaller batteries compared to what we have on the Samsung side of things because they have their own chips. They're generally more optimized. My iPhone 16 Pro Max gives me great battery life, sometimes better than the S25 Edge, even though it's got a smaller battery. But man, that looks like a small battery.
Yeah, it is. It is. I did see some rumors also talking about Apple might actually be using silicon carbon batteries. But again, the benefit there is just basically condensing or basically packing more into size. So it looks like it's still going to be 2,900. It's just that the footprint is smaller for 2,900, so to speak. It's here or there, but I'm very skeptical because, number one, the battery size and also heat dissipation will be an interesting thing because it's also slightly thinner, especially when, for me, when you're gaming and things like that. That is something that I'm not sure about because Samsung still has a vapor chamber, by the way, in the S25 Edge. iPhone is notorious for just not having anything at all. So I'm going to see how that actually pans out when it comes to gaming and stuff like that. So
okay, so I can almost, if betting was halal, I would almost be tempted to bet that the iPhone 17 Air will not have silicon carbon technology, because if Samsung didn't do it with the S25 series and especially the S25 Edge, I don't think Apple are going to do it. I don't think so. Again, I might be wrong, but I don't think they're going to do it. And I think the reason for that is silicon carbon technology is still new, and at the amount of units that Samsung and Apple have to ship out are quite significant, right, compared to other manufacturers. So yes, we've seen silicon carbon technology from many others, but they do not ship out anywhere near the amount of units that Samsung and Apple do, right? So I just think from a logistics point of view, I also think Samsung is a bit more cautious when it comes to battery technology, because of the Note 7.
I wonder why.
And with Apple, I generally find that they don't kind of adopt a new technology like that quickly. They kind of let it develop a little bit until it's able to meet the demand that Apple has in terms of units, right? Okay, because they ship out a lot of units. So personally, I don't think it's going to be silicon carbon. Maybe with the A19 Pro, it's just going to be super, super efficient and somehow it's going to be fine. But that does make me it does make me worry a little bit that 2,900 milliamps as rumored. If that is the case, then how is that going to be? But of course, we're going to be doing an S25 Edge versus iPhone 17 Air comparison as soon as the device is out, which is rumored to be around September time. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, it should be fun.
Exciting. Honor 400 Pro, we have both covered this device recently, and it introduced a new feature called AI image to video. This uses Google's Veo 2 model, and essentially it can convert a still image into a very convincing and realistic looking video. And honestly, absolutely mind blown. The way these results are, I've put in pictures, and if you were to show somebody a video, they would not be able to tell that this was made from a still image. They would just say, no, this is a video. Like, what are you talking about, right? And I think the key example that I shared, which really makes you think, is a selfie that I took on the Honor 400 Pro. I put it through this AI image to video converter. It made a video out of this, and it looked very, very convincing. But if you look closely in my sunglasses, my hands are not moving in the sunglasses, but they're moving in the video. And that's the only way you would be able to tell. But that actually is a really good example, because if you don't look close, you're like, no, it's an absolutely fine video. And then you look close and you're like, oh, actually, this is kind of freaky, because it's made a video out of just a still image. And sometimes it can be a little bit here or there, but generally speaking, I've just been absolutely mind blown by this feature.
Yeah, it's a really interesting feature, and seeing the Veo 2 model, especially the Veo 3 is out now, right? That, you know, Google talked about it in I/O and stuff like that. But even seeing that model work on a smartphone and bringing those images to life, it kind of reminds me, I've seen some AI companies show ads, which most likely they're probably using a similar model also, where, like, you know, relive or revive your old photos, especially of grandma or something like that, you know, somebody who you haven't seen in a long time, where you could animate those images, is a bit spooky and also really cool at the same time. And you're right. This is all about paying attention to detail for you, trying to find out if this is really an image, or I'm saying really a video, or this is something that's created by AI. Because if you don't pay attention, especially, you know, when you're on social media, if you just scroll through, you're like, oh, wow, that's pretty nice. I didn't know Saf did that. You know, it could be like Saf playing American football, and it's an image of him just holding the ball, and next minute he's throwing it, and you're like, oh wow, I didn't know Saf could play.
I like do, that. Yeah. I used to play American football back in the day.
Yeah, exactly.
As you can see from my, you know, very broad and muscular build.
So I think that's that also poses some interesting concerns, because it's like, you know, what happens to your image? Now the question is, it has to be taken on the Honor device, or can you actually just add an image?
You can any
device?
image. I've got images, like I put in photos of me when I was a kid. Absolutely fine. There is no restrictions. Whatever you upload onto there, it will try to work. Sometimes it won't work, depending on the image, and if it's a bit more difficult. But what I found is 9 out of 10 times it will just work, right? And, you know, you're right. It does raise a few questions. Right now, it's quite limited in terms of it will just do what it thinks, and you can generate another one. You can't really tell it what to do. You can't say, okay, make Saf do this particular dance or whatever, right? You can't make it do that, but it will just kind of figure out something based on that picture. Usually it'll do something where, you know, the individual is talking or whatever. It also works with cartoons. So for example, I fed a cartoon image of myself that artist Kwanji Hay put together, amazing artist, and, you know, it started animating like which was a still drawing, and it started, you know, making it move and all sorts, and it's just like, wow, this is amazing. But it does raise concerns, because I mean, like, the immediate concern that came to my mind is, you know, from an ethical perspective, right, is, you know, you were mentioning, oh, your grandma or whatever, right? Okay, to me personally, I'm like, okay, if it's something like, if it's a picture of me or somebody that's currently here, but if somebody's passed and then you're trying to like bring them back to life, essentially, you've not asked them, you obviously can't get their consent of using their likeness and image to bring that back to life. It raises so many ethical questions and dilemmas around that. You know, this is the thing, because then now it's getting into really freaky territory, because, you know, you don't know how these tools will develop and how people will be using them.
Yeah, I mean, no, absolutely. I think on the one hand, you doing it for yourself and your family, like that small niche, right? That's a very good sell. That's something that we go like, oh yes, you know, definitely would love to see this old picture of, you know, family members getting animated or whatever the case may be. Like, you know, you're at a wedding or a party or something. But then again, you're right. You know, once it leaves you, or in our case, just us, images of us in general are out there. Once it goes out to the public domain, anybody can do anything with it. And there theoretically is no way to limit it. To be fair, there's just no way for you to have constraints to this kind of tech. So that's where some of those dilemmas come in. And then also the fact that most people will not be able to catch that it's not real is the bigger question. Because there's one thing for somebody to do something nefarious with the image. There's another thing for people to realize that is not really what's happening in the image as well.
Exactly. And this is where I think it's a real dilemma. And, you mentioned a good point there. Myself and you, for example, there are too many, arguably too many images of us online already. You know what I mean? So It doesn't stop anybody from just taking one of those images, feeding it through one of these generators and making a video of us doing something, saying something, which we may not do. That's one area. But then the other area is like, people, especially family, kids and stuff like that. And the only way I guess you can prevent this from happening is by not uploading pictures. And obviously that's not something that's ideal, but it's kind of looking like that way because it is a scary sort of future that we are now stepping into because we just don't know what's going to be happening next.
Mm-hmm. Very, very true.
But that aside, all of that dilemma aside, it's so bloody good. I was just like, what? This is so crazy. And it really shows you what this is capable of and just how crazy this technology is. I mean, just a few years ago, this would have just not even been like, unheard of. You want to think of it, we were talking about deep fake technology and stuff like that back then. And it was still very complicated. It was still very noticeable, easy to, see where things have gone wrong and, where the sort of errors are. Now it's just so easy, so quick and so good.
Yeah. It's going to be an interesting future.
It will be interesting, but scary future. Now, one of the devices that this feature will be on, of course, is going to be the new Google Pixel 10 Pro series. As we know, Google are the worst at keeping anything under wraps, and we covered some of the leaks and rumors in our previous episode. But now we have full-on pictures because it seems like the Google's marketing team or advertising team were out shooting an ad for the Pixel 10. And a passerby managed to get some very high-resolution pictures. And this is a username Mark's Gone Public on Twitter, X, and managed to zoom in, take some pictures. We've got these guys with, which is clearly the Pixel 10. Yeah, it looks like it's got a glossy back. It's like kind of like a bluey sort of silver color. And then we've got they're using one of those probe cameras, where you can really get up close and stuff like that. And then we've got the full storyboard as well. Every year they just kind of like, okay, let's just keep consistent. At least they're consistent, right? From the Google Pixel 1 all the way to the Google Pixel 10. We've seen the leaks way in advance, in detail, as we can see here.
I mean, so this is an interesting thing for me here because, you can't really blame anybody who's shooting that commercial that they're trying to craft for it, right? Because they're just doing their job. They go on location. But this has to be an inside job. Somebody must be like, hey, if you go to Fifth Avenue by 10 a.m., you'll see something. Just get your cameras ready. It might be, one of our devices. I mean, come on.
I don't know, because look, you'd never okay, so for example, when you go to an Apple keynote, right, the iPhone, they've gone in and then they've gone out, shot these amazing sort of commercials showing off the cinematic mode, the 4K 120 frames a second slow motion. We see all of that in the keynotes, but we've never had something like this. I think they were a bit more vigilant. They kind of do some background. They kind of look around the area, make sure that there is nobody that can be, or like pick locations where it's not as
it's
easy,
more secluded.
Yeah? Whereas Google just seemed to be like, oh yeah, let's just go around. Let's
we shoot down the street.
Let's just go down the street from our headquarters. I don't know what they're doing here, but this kind of confirms all the leaks and rumors. It does look very similar. We've covered more of the details in the previous episode, so do check that out. And the preview is apparently scheduled. The current rumor date is around the 27th of June. If that's not the launch date, then that's where we might see a bit of a preview of the Pixel. Is what currently is being passed around. So not too long.
What is up, guys? Just time out. Like, why are we moving into June?
I know.
Like, just a preview. Like, give a brother some space.
I know. We're just gonna have covered WWDC. We're gonna be covering other stuff in the straight away. Yeah, he's big. So, again, that might be just a preview. Apparently, there's an event in London that's going to be happening, and they, for Pixel users, and this is where they might kind of like tease it or something like that. But based on Google's reputation over the past 9 devices, and obviously they're gonna carry this on, is that we are likely to see every little detail of the device way before it's officially announced. Right, now next week is WWDC 25, Apple's worldwide developer conference. We've started to see more and more kind of rumors about what we might expect. I think the biggest one that me and you were talking about, is the name change. Okay.
Yeah.
So right now we have, iOS 17, we have visionOS 2, we have watchOS 10, etc. Right? It's all kind of disjointed. There's all these different numbers. It looks like Apple will be shifting to the year. So this new iOS that we see being announced at WWDC will be iOS 26. 26 because it will be mostly used in the year 2026. That is currently what we're thinking. So that's currently what the rumors are. It'll be iOS 26, iPadOS 26, macOS 26, tvOS 26, etc., right? So it will be consistent with the year, which kind of makes sense because at the end of the day, things are, as I said, very disjointed right now. You don't really know what's going on. Like, okay, which version is it? I get confused myself when I'm trying to remember what version it is. Having that in sync with the year would make sense. But my question is, will they do that for the iPhones as well then? Because, it would make sense, right? Because then you're going to have the iPhone 17 running iOS 26. And then when you get to the iOS 20, you're gonna have iOS 29. I don't even know. Yes. See, like it's already getting confusing. Yeah. So what are they gonna do?
So, okay, me personally, I don't think it's a good idea for software to match the year. I don't think it's necessary because I think it's one of those things where it's cool, but consumers don't care. If I ask my wife what version of iOS she's using or what version of macOS is her Mac, she's like the latest software. That's the most that she would tell me. It's like, I think it's running the latest, right? I got an update the other day.
The key thing is, she probably doesn't even know which one it is. Yeah, I think it's when you check and it's like, you've not even updated. You're running 3-year-old software right here. What's going on?
Yeah, so she has no care in the world for it.
Yeah.
But the device is one that I think either it's important for you to match the year or you just keep it the way it is. So I think even though a lot of people are making a lot of noise about this, for the general consumer, which is mostly Apple's consumer base, right? Compared to, say, Samsung, where their consumer base is a little bit more hardcore because Android users are more diligent about what they look at. I don't think it matters. I think it's a nice PR thing to say they're doing because, you're coming like WWDC, this is all about software. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense here, at least for this occasion. But I don't think it's that important for like the whole Apple ecosystem as a whole.
Because Samsung, obviously, we went from the S10 and then there was no S11 and it jumped up to the S20 in the year 2020. And, that to me kind of like, initially I was like, okay, it's a bit complicated, but it kind of made sense. But it was a little bit more organized in the sense that we went from 10 to 20, right? And then since then. And if I'm honest with you, it does make it easy because when you're thinking, when you're trying to talk to somebody about the latest Samsung Galaxy device, 25, it's the year 2025. It's the S25 series. Nice and easy. Like, I actually quite like that naming convention. I think it kind of lines up nicely. I don't think Apple are going to do it for their iPhone series. Not yet anyway. For the software, if you're saying that, the regular user couldn't care less, then that's fine. It's not gonna impact them, right? But for developers, it might just make things a little bit easier and a bit more consistent because it's like, okay, we're working on watchOS 25, iOS 25, iPadOS 25. It's a little bit more kind of, just easier and a bit cleaner, I think, just generally. So I think that's not a bad thing. Maybe we'll see.
No, I don't think it is. I think it's, like I said, it's most likely for developers, and for the regular user, that news would just go like this.
They probably won't even know. Now, some bit of news that will affect the end user is basically about the actual system, the design of it. Now, what we're hearing, this comes from Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, is that the design change is going to be the biggest update to iOS since iOS 7, right? So they're kind of going to go for round app icons, a bit more like the Vision Pro OS that we've seen. So the Vision OS that we've seen for the Vision Pro, circular icons with that kind of glassy floating design. So we have a lot of transparency there as well. I'm all for that. I think I quite like the interface of the Vision OS. I quite like how it looks. It's nice and clean. So that's going to be a little bit of an update. Might take a little bit of time to get used to, but that's something that I'm not too against. I think that would be pretty welcome.
I'm fine with it, I guess. I just want to see better usability for the large iPhone devices, the 16 and 16 Pro. Now, I've said this to a few iPhone users and they all tell me like, no, you can go back certain ways. Like there's still certain apps and still certain functionalities where the back button is at the very top left. That needs to go. That needs to just go away, because it doesn't make any sense what it is. I also need to see more that, multitasking usability for a 16 Pro Max and anything in that large scale, just because it doesn't make sense that this is going back to the old word, phablets. And we're not getting that, like with something like the S25 Ultra, Samsung running multitasking. It's really nice to actually do that on a large smartphone, especially if whether you're watching a video and you have to send a tweet, or you're looking at messages, or you're trying to copy one thing from, one email source or to an email, whatever the case may be. Just things like that. That to me you can do it on the iPad. You should be able to do it on this device.
So for once, I'm going to agree with you. Usually we just disagree on everything. I do agree. Like that back button right at the top, especially if you're trying to use your phone with one hand, it's just so annoying. It doesn't matter how big your hands are. Trying to reach your thumb all the way to the top corner, unless you're, Andre the Giant, who is known to have huge hands, right? You are not going to be able to reach the top corner of that. I don't care what anybody says. And it's not consistent, because on some apps you can just kind of swipe and go back, and others you can't. So then there is that, element of consistency, which I think needs to be there. So yeah, I totally agree with that. And I have been ranting about Apple icons, because I remember actually I did this when we had the iPhone mini, RIP. I put the iPhone mini next to the Max version, right? So the iPhone 14 mini to the iPhone 14 Pro Max, okay?
Yeah.
We put them side by side, and the home pages are exactly the same. It's like, bro, come on. I have so much more screen real estate, right? I have so much more screen area, but I still can't have, for instance, 5 columns if I want to, right? Why can't I do that? It's still 4. It's like, what is the use of all of this blank space that I'm not even using, right? If I've got a big phone now, yes, Apple likes to have consistency across their devices, but it just seems like such a waste of space. So I do agree. That's something that I would like to see. So this is a bit of our wish list. Are they going to do that? I don't know. I doubt it, but we'll see. But apart from that, there are a few other leaks. I mean, there's not much about Apple Intelligence. I wonder what they're going to say about Apple Intelligence, how it's gone, what else. It's just going to be a bit of a question mark what's going to be happening around that.
I mean, the previous rumor, I think it was also Mark Gurman a few months ago, is that they're looking for a true revamp in 2026. It's not going to be this year, which puts them squarely behind, especially after Google's strong showing at I/O, with just everything they have. We know how ChatGPT is rolling, even Claude as well. There's DeepSeek. There's so many avenues out there that I think, from a Apple perspective, or even the Apple user's perspective, it's very interesting to see how, my friends, when I use some of the AI features on the Galaxy, and they go, whoa, this is great. A prime example recently this week was, my wife is like, what, I need to start putting stuff down, just reminders and stuff. And I literally, because I use it now all the time, I was like, just tell your phone to remind you with Gemini, because Gemini does it so well on the Galaxy. And I'm like, I'll do it for you, babe, and I'll remind you, don't worry, because your phone can't do it. That was literally my answer.
Man, but this is the thing. It's gonna be interesting to see what they kind of say and do, because again, with Siri, there's been a lot of hope, but there's not really anything that's delivered up until now. So it'd be interesting to see what they say there. From a hardware perspective, according to Mark Gurman and other leakers, there's not really much information about there. So it looks like there might potentially be some a new Mac Pro, but that's pretty much the only thing that's currently rumored. Potentially some AirPods, maybe some AirPods Pro 3 potentially. Which
I don't think a Pro 3 though. I think more indications, at least for me, some of the other softer rumors I've seen were on the audio side, maybe a refresh of the Macs that might bring it down to the same price as like the XM6s in that regard, or maybe even slightly cheaper just because materials will change. The reason why I actually believe this rumor more than say the Pro 3s, new Pro, like the Pros are doing really well, that it's really hard to make an update now. And then also the Maxes, right? You don't need to change the drivers on those headphones. You need to change the build of the headphones. That's literally it on those. So you still have a lot of the old drivers you can use. They're really good. They're fine. There's really nothing. I mean, there's fine tuning you can do with software and stuff like that, but it's more of like maybe it's like a revamped design and also cheaper material, right? On there. So to me, I think that might come to play.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I will be there covering from the ground, so stay tuned for that. Enabong,
I will not be there.
He might just surprise us. Who knows? I just surprise. Here I am at WWDC. But no, it'll be interesting, and let's see. Because I mean, last year it was all around Apple Intelligence. This time, I think it's going to be more around like the kind of revamp that we've got. Any particular features? We'll be covering as many of those as we can next week, so stay tuned for that. And that is all we have time for in this episode of SuperSaf Speaks. As always,
a short episode.
Yeah, actually, I just looked at the time. I thought we covered quite a bit, but it's only 40 minutes. So you guys get 20 minutes back of your time. You're welcome. But yeah, if you enjoyed this episode, you want to see more like it, then do consider subscribing to the YouTube channel, and also on your favorite podcasting platform, do also drop us a rating. We're posting a lot more clips. So we're posting clips on YouTube as well as Reels highlights on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. So you can follow us on those platforms as well. We're on SuperSaf Speaks on all of them. This has been your host, SuperSaf, with my co-host,
Thunder E from Border Work,
on SuperSaf Speaks, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.